Today we compare the Sound Devices MixPre 10.2 and the Zoom F8n Pro. Welcome to Morphilm Academy. Quick disclaimer, this is not actually a Zoom F8n Pro, but it's exactly the same thing except for the 32-bit float option, and a few details. These two recorders are the standard in prosumer or even some professional sound recording. For the price, they are the best options, but which one should you choose? This won't be a full review, but more of a buyer's guide. Also, we'll mostly focus on differences, so if something is too similar on both, or we don't feel like it would make a difference in your choice, we might not mention it. First, let's get the sound quality out of the way. They're both just as great. If you're at a point in your career where the difference between them matters, you can afford much higher end gear. Now, let's start with pricing. It's simple, the MixPre 10 is about double the price, so please keep that in mind during this video. Why is it so much more expensive? Well, first, it's made in America. The Zoom is made in China. And of course, you do pay for the brand name. Sound Devices is a staple in the professional audio world. Zoom is better known for their consumer-grade H-series recorders. This can matter a lot. Simply put, the Zoom is much more power efficient. We can't give you exact numbers because it depends on your setup, but in general, we usually need almost 2 full 98 Wh smart batteries for a typical 12-hour shoot day with the MixPre 10. We'll do the same thing with only one battery on the Zoom. In both cases, however, you do need an external power solution like these smart batteries. Don't expect to use them with AA's, it would be a nightmare. Another thing to note is that the only way to power the MixPre 10 is with the Hiroshi connector. USB-C can power the MixPre 3 and 6, but not 10. So, if something happens to the Hiroshi port, you're screwed. Zoom, on the other hand, has a second power input. That can be useful. Now, about AA batteries. Although we wouldn't use them to power the device, they can be great as a backup for hot swapping batteries. That said, they both offer pretty crappy battery compartment access. On the Zoom, it would be great if the recorder is not in a bag. On the MixPre, however, it's just ridiculous. It's at the bottom, hard to remove, and blocks access to the SD card. Overall, it just sucks. Overall, they're both great. They feel solid and well made. The MixPre is a bit thinner and lighter, which can be great in a bag. But honestly, we would prefer it larger to accommodate more buttons and a larger screen. Also, we found the MixPre has some build quality issues with the XLR connectors. The release buttons are way too small, hard to press, and the cables often get stuck in the ports. That's a big problem and a major downside. That is one of our main complaints with the MixPre. They put in a touchscreen, which is great, but they made it tiny. That said, the menus are well made so that it's still easy to use. The main problem is the keyboard. You can't actually use the touchscreen to type, which is ridiculous. Also, the small screen gives you very limited info on the view meters, and if you have bad eyesight, everything is much smaller, so keep that in mind. Overall, we much prefer the nice large screen of the Zoom, even though it's not a touchscreen. We even prefer it that way. On the Zoom, you control everything with physical buttons, and most of it with this control knob. We personally much prefer this over a touchscreen. You can actually control it with gloves in the winter or with sweaty or wet fingers in the summer. On the MixPre, you do also have a control knob, but they had the great idea of putting it on the side. You know, as if people are not using this in a sound bag. So, the experience is horrible, and unfortunately, you must use it to do several things the touchscreen can't do, like typing. Unless you have an external keyboard or the phone app. More on that later. With that stupid control knob placement, even adjusting headphone volume sucks. On the Zoom, you have a nice dedicated headphone knob on the top. However, when it comes to gain and or fader knobs, the MixPres are definitely much better, including the nice status light around them to quickly know when in solo or mute mode and when you're peaking. They're simply much nicer to use. That said, the Zooms are not as bad as they look. They are small, but unless you have thick gloves or large fingers, they work surprisingly well. However, we're very disappointed they did not even upgrade them on the new F8n Pro. It's definitely possible. The proof is that you can find third-party 3D printed knobs to upgrade them. As for the menus, Zoom has dedicated channel arming and track menu buttons. This can give you quicker access to certain things like arming tracks. The MixPre is much better, however, with media controls. This simple joystick is a bit flimsy, but it's so much faster and easier to start and stop recording. Even in the dark, you can always find the controls. On the Zoom, for some reason, they put a light on the play, pause, and the record button, but not on the other ones. It's especially a problem for the stop button since you need it all the time to stop recordings, as well as for most of the shortcuts. That's a major downside for us, and the only solutions we found is an external light or these glow-in-the-dark tapes. So overall, the MixPre is much easier to use in the dark. That said, both have pros and cons, and we personally prefer the Zoom just a bit more. This brings us to shortcuts, another advantage for the Zoom. With all these buttons and the shortcuts, we actually find the Zoom to be easy to use even without the phone app, which we can't say for the MixPre. You can see all of them directly in the menu. Our most used ones are scene increments, false take number, user scene name, track name edit, note edit, circle take, and of course headphone routing, so you can quickly change and modify presets. It takes a bit longer on the MixPre, especially when you try to remember which one does what. Also, shortcuts are very limiting. First, you have this two-way switch with customizable shortcuts, which is fantastic. But like idiots, they didn't even make a shortcut for scene names, which is the most useful one. But it is nice that they give you some options. We found the solo menu option super useful. With a simple click, you can quickly solo or mute multiple tracks. We use this all the time on every shoot. It's probably the feature we like the most about the MixPre. On the Zoom, you unfortunately can't solo multiple tracks, unless you make a headphone preset for it, but it's just not the same. Back to the shortcuts, the only other ones on the MixPre is holding the stupid side knob and clicking on channel 1 or 2, accessing channel 9 and 10. That's it! It would be so easy to add more, but they don't. However, since you can easily connect an external keyboard, it does open up a whole bunch more shortcuts. They're not perfect, like still no direct shortcut for scene names, but it's still much faster than the touchscreen. So, Sound Devices, please add some good shortcuts. We're begging you. They both have 8 combo XLR inputs and they add 2 extra connections in different ways. The MixPre has a 3.5mm stereo input for channel 9 and 10. And the Zoom has the same proprietary connector found on the Zoom H5 and 6. Although this can be great to add their mic connection, it actually gets assigned to tracks 1 and 2, so they are not extra channels. Plus, it's at the bottom of the device, so in a sound bag, not that useful. So we've actually never used it. On the MixPre, we use that input all the time for Rode Wireless Pro. As for outputs, they're both the same except for the headphone port. The Zoom wins again with the solid 1/4-inch connector. It feels more sturdy and professional. A quick note on timecode. Zoom put the BNC connectors on the bottom, which we find annoying. But since we usually let our sync box always connected, it's no big deal. Back to the XLR ports, the MixPre does have analog limiters when recording in 24-bit. Those are usually considered better. It's digital on the Zoom, but still very clean on the new F8n Pro. Also, they are useless on both if you record in 32-bit float anyway. The MixPre definitely has the advantage with both a USB-A and USB-C port, while the Zoom still has, in 2025, a mini USB port. That is insane. So, on the Zoom, the only thing it can really do is connect to a computer to use as an audio interface or transfer files very slowly. The MixPre allows for all sorts of accessories, more on that later. The Zoom gets a huge win for this one, with its dual SD cards which record simultaneously and in different formats if you want. They're also easily accessible on the side of the recorder. It's perfect. On the MixPre, however, they had the fantastic idea of putting a single SD card reader on the bottom, so when in a sound bag, it's a nightmare. At least, they do have a backup recording option on a USB thumb drive on the side. This is much more accessible, but it can't record in different formats and it only copies the files from the SD card after you press stop. It works well the vast majority of the time, but it does happen that the files are not copied properly or at all, so we still feel the need to use the SD card to transfer files to a computer. Also, you simply can't record directly on the USB drive. So if the SD card reader fails, that could be a big problem. This is a huge win for the MixPre. With the USB-A port, you can connect a lot of third-party accessories. First, we suggest getting a USB hub like this one from Anker, so you can connect multiple devices and still keep the USB thumb drive backup. This also makes it a lot easier to access. So, you can connect wired or wireless USB keyboards, a selection of mixing boards, the Viviana clock box, and probably other things. We use a wireless mini keyboard all the time with it. And to have cheap options like the Cord Nano Control 2 to mix is a huge advantage. On the Zoom, as far as we know, you can only connect the F control console, which on top of being pretty expensive, is actually now discontinued. Even for a keyboard, you need the F control to connect it. That is ridiculous. We hoped it would get better with the Pro version, but no. This is not an option on the MixPre, but on the Zoom, you can connect some accessories via Bluetooth, like the UltraSync Blue timecode generator. That could be useful for you, but we never used it. As for the phone app, we'd say Zoom has a lot more options, but the design is very outdated and the connection to the recorder is very slow. And you have to reconnect it every time you turn the recorder off. Even simply changing the scene name takes a long time to load. But that said, contrary to the MixPre, you don't really need it. We actually used the Zoom for 2 years without using the app, and it wasn't a problem at all. If you do use it, it can still be very useful with wireless controls of the menus, taking longer notes, and even mixing. This is far from being as good as the external mixing boards you have with the MixPre, but can still be very useful, especially if you're ever in a situation without physical access to the recorder. One other thing to note is that connecting the Zoom app deactivates a lot of the functions you can do directly on the recorder. For example, you can't access the Finder or the PFL menu. We find this very annoying. On the MixPre, you keep all of the controls. On the MixPre, however, the app is essential. We would never use it without the phone app connected, but it is pretty great. First, it connects automatically and really fast compared to Zoom. It doesn't give you as many options like controlling the menus or mixing, but it does most of the essentials and it does them very well. You can quickly name or rename scenes or tracks, take super long notes, have a proper and useful view meter view, undo takes, and more. This app actually makes the MixPre enjoyable to use. However, it is still a Bluetooth connection. It does sometimes have dropouts, bugs, or lags. Especially if you close the app, then need to quickly change the next scene name, you'll need to wait for all the scenes to load before you can. That can be quite a while at the end of the day. That's actually why we like using an external keyboard. It simply works all the time with no lag whatsoever. Also, a quick note on the weight. Although the MixPre is a bit lighter than the Zoom, if you have to carry a keyboard, a phone, and a phone mount on the bag, it adds up. As for the iPad apps, everything still applies. They both get just a bit better by giving you more options on the main page. When we do any cart work, we always use the iPad app. We would say this is a bit like comparing Android to iOS. It all depends on how you like to work. For us, Zoom is like Android. It gives you so much more customization option, but at the cost of simplicity. The learning curve is a bit higher, but it's crazy how much they give you for the price. If we open up the menu, you have direct access to the SD cards. You can create folders, access the trash and false takes, access options for your recorded files. You can see markers, rename, edit the metadata, copy and paste the file. In short, it's like a mini computer. If we go to metadata for next take, you can add notes with presets and create new ones. You can choose how you want to name your files and get a history of all you've recently done. You can change how the scene auto-increments when you use the shortcut, as well as choose take name formats. In the input menu, you can quickly change settings for every channel at once. This also works for several other menus. In the rec menu, you can decide what you record on each SD card. You also have small customizations like how big the timecode is on your screen, or what your level meters display. You even have control on each of your meter views. On the MixPre, you only have 3 non-customizable views. We also much prefer the amount of details the meters on the Zoom show you. It's quite limited on the MixPre. You even have an outdoor mode for the screen, or even unlock some of them. So overall, you have a lot more options. None of what we just said is available on the MixPre. And although this makes it somewhat easier to use, some things are actually more complicated, especially because of the lack of shortcuts. For example, and most importantly, name intakes is horrible on the MixPre unless you have the phone app. First, you need to touch the scene name, then edit, name number notes, name, and then try to type with the stupid knob on the side of the device. On the Zoom, you have 3 options. The first is also pretty complicated. You can click on menu, then metadata, user scene name, edit. But then, it's actually really easy to type on this with the front knob and large screen compared to the MixPre. You can even use the shortcuts to navigate the keyboard faster, and you have the history to help. The second option is scene increments. Simply hold the stop and fast forward button to go to the next scene or shot. This can be very fast, but of course limiting. The third option is the shortcut stop +1. This brings you straight to user scene name, so you can just click on edit and start typing. So it's much easier on the Zoom. This is actually why you can actually operate it without a phone app, which honestly is not realistic on the MixPre. Now let's talk about plugins. On the MixPre, you have the Ambisonic, Mix Assist, and Noise Assist, which are all an extra cost. On the Zoom, the Ambisonic and Auto Mix are included for free. As for the Noise Assist, it is a really cool feature that's not possible on the Zoom, unfortunately. But for $300 we much prefer simply doing it in post-production. It's gonna be much better anyway. The only times it could be useful to do it on the recorder is for live recordings or really quick turnarounds with no editing. But considering the MixPre is already double the price, we find this not worth it in most cases. Some other options are the Reporter plugin, which allows you to lock the menus for $30, and the Musician plugin to add features like overdub, bounce, reverb, and tracking to a metronome. But as a sound recordist, I don't really care about that. The MixPre does have an included extra little feature that could be very useful, however. It's the remix. This allows you to redo a left and right channel mix of a track you've already recorded. We've never actually used it on set, but it could be useful if you mess up your mix and don't want anyone to know. Both the Zoom and MixPre have the ability to create a sound report, which is essential on a professional shoot, but they both do it a bit differently. The MixPre includes a lot more details, some of them twice, and some a bit useless in most cases. And they start the track count with the mix tracks. Other than that, they're pretty similar and do the job well, but they could both be a lot better. In both cases, we do clean them up a bit before sending them anyway. So, in summary, both of these field recorders are fantastic devices. It's crazy to think we can get this much for these prices. If you're trying to choose between the two, it's pretty simple in our humble opinion. The only reason you should get the MixPre 10.2 is if you work in well-paid fiction filmmaking where an external mixer and the brand name matters. Because indeed, Zoom still has the reputation of making amateur gear because of the popularity of the H series. That's it, and same goes for the MixPre 3 and 6. They are not worth the price compared to all you get with Zoom. So for anything corporate, documentaries, or low-budget fiction work, the Zoom F8n Pro is more than enough. Some details like the gain knob and the phone app are better on the MixPre, but are they worth double the price? Let us know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.